Welcome to this explainer. If you've ever found yourself looking at the incredibly slick, paper-thin screens we use today and wondering how in the world did we actually get here, well, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're unpacking the fascinating and totally invisible physics that operated inside a classic piece of tech, the cathode ray tube. Let's dive right into how these marvels of engineering actually worked.
It's a great question, right? I mean, think back to those incredibly heavy, deep, mysterious glass boxes that used to just dominate our desks and living rooms. How did those bulky vintage monitors actually take raw electrical voltage and transform it into the vibrant, moving worlds of early computing and television? It honestly looked like magic, but it wasn't. It was an absolute masterpiece of physics and mechanical precision, all working together in a total vacuum. So let's look at the foundational steps of how this was actually pulled off.
Section 1. Firing the electron beam. The journey begins.
Okay, so looking at the cross-section of this vacuum tube, the starting line is actually all the way in the back. Notice the heater and cathode sitting over on the left there? The cathode generates the electrons, and then an electron gun fires them forward in a super concentrated beam. Now, way over on the right side is the finish line, the fluorescent screen. The whole entire goal of this incredibly complex glass bottle is to get that invisible beam of electrons from the back to precisely the right spot on the front. Let's break down that physical journey step by step. First up, as we just saw, the electron gun fires the beam. Second, that beam gets accelerated. It's pulled forward through a hole in the anode, and this happens because of a voltage difference between the cathode and the anode. Third, the beam has to be steered. As it travels, it passes through horizontal and vertical deflection coils or plates, which essentially steer the beam to any exact coordinate on the screen. And finally, step 4, the beam strikes the phosphor-coated screen. When the electrons actually hit that phosphor, it causes that specific, tiny point on the screen to emit light. And this perfectly illustrates the sheer mind-boggling power required to make all this happen. 20,000 volts. The intensity of the light, basically how bright that little spot on the screen glows, is controlled by changing the anode voltage. And as our source material points out, that voltage can be cranked up as high as 20,000 volts. That is a massive amount of directed energy confined inside a vacuum tube, which, let's be honest, is kind of wild when you realize we used to sit literally inches away from these things to watch Saturday morning cartoons. All of that power just to create a single glowing dot of light. But, a single dot doesn't really make a picture.
Section 2. The magic of color. Multiplying the beams.
To get a full picture, we need to define what a pixel actually is in the physical realm of a CRT. We toss the word pixel around all the time today, but here, it's a very physical, tangible thing. A pixel, or picture element, in a color CRT is formed by a triad. Think of it as a specific pattern of 3 phosphor dots coded right onto the screen. These dots are doped to emit 3 primary colors: red, green, and blue. This RGB triad is the fundamental building block of the entire display. So the absolutely crucial part is how we actually light those specific colors up. Instead of just one electron gun, a color display uses 3 separate electron guns. You've got one for red, one for green, and one for blue. These 3 distinct beams are fired toward the screen, and they converge on something called a shadow mask. This is a thin foil sheet positioned right behind the screen, and it's filled with tiny, tiny holes. These holes are perfectly aligned so that the red beam only hits the red phosphor, the green hits the green, and the blue hits the blue. By varying the intensity of each individual electron beam as it hits its respective dot, the CRT can mix those 3 primary colors to produce virtually any color or hue imaginable. It's an astonishingly delicate mechanical choreography, and it's happening thousands of times a second.
Moving to Section 3, painting the screen, the illusion of motion. So, how do we zoom out to the macro level and actually manage millions of these tiny glowing triads to form a cohesive image? Well, the answer lies in methodical, rapid movement. You see, the image on a CRT isn't created all at once. It is meticulously painted. The electron beams sweep horizontally across the screen, starting from the left side over to the right side, drawing just one line. Then it drops down and draws the next line, one after the other, until it reaches the very bottom of the screen. It's this continuous, relentless sweeping motion. To really appreciate this, let's just look at the sheer scale of the operation. Think about a classic standard display resolution, let's say 1024 by 768. That means the screen width is 1024 pixels and the height is 768 lines of pixels.
If you do the math and multiply that out, it equals 786,432 individual pixels. The electron beams have to sweep across the screen and accurately update the color and brightness for over 750,000 pixels, one by one, over and over again.
And the thing is, it has to do it incredibly fast because of the biological limits of our own human perception. Our eyes are remarkable, for sure, but they definitely have a specific threshold. The human eye actually won't notice the flicker of a changing image as long as that image changes at least every 30 milliseconds. If it's slower than that, we start to see a strobe effect. But if it's faster, our brain basically just blends it all into smooth, continuous reality.
So engineers design these machines to easily beat our biology. Typically, CRTs have a 60 Hz refresh rate. That means the entire screen, all 786,000 plus of those pixels, is completely updated and redrawn every 1/60th of a second. That is precisely 16.7 milliseconds. By moving that insanely fast, the CRT effortlessly fools our brains into seeing a solid image in smooth motion. It entirely masks the fact that we're actually just watching a single, incredibly fast dot of light zigzagging across a glass screen.
Section 4. 2 ways to draw. Raster versus vector.
This next distinction is absolutely crucial, especially when looking at how this tech was used in complex systems like aviation equipment. The technique we've been talking about up until now, that left-to-right line-by-line scanning, that's known as raster scanning. It's exactly what everyday television CRTs use. Raster is perfectly suited for quickly filling in large areas, like the backgrounds for an artificial horizon, a digital map, or a weather radar display. But cockpit displays in particular often utilize a second technique called stroke or vector graphics. Instead of scanning every single line, vector graphics are ideal for precisely drawing specific symbology overlaid right on top of that raster background.
And here is exactly how that vector process works. First, the display processor generates shapes by sending voltage point pairs over to the display. Second, a component called a digital-to-analog converter, or DAC, steps in to convert these digital signal points into actual analog voltages for the CRT. And finally, rather than sweeping line by line, the electron beam uses those coordinates to draw a straight line from the last point directly to the current point, doing it all in one single continuous stroke. It acts a lot more like a pen connecting dots on a piece of paper, which results in incredibly crisp, bright symbols for a pilot to read.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We've traded these heavy glass vacuum tubes, our 20,000-volt electron guns, and our glowing phosphors for these flat, efficient digital panels. But you know, when you buy a brand new monitor today, you still check the pixel count. You still look for a 60 Hz or 120 Hz refresh rate. So how much of the very vocabulary and foundational architecture of our modern digital world is really still just mimicking the brilliant line-by-line physics of the CRT? It's definitely something to think about the next time you look at a screen. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking questions about the magic inside the box.